That animal needs to go, or he does. I paid for first class, and I will not sit next to this animal. Get it out of here now! He is my service dog, and he is staying right where he is.
The first mistake happened before the aircraft ever left the gate. Linda Harper pointed at the dog beneath seat 3A and said, loud enough for half the first-class cabin to hear, "That animal needs to go, or he does." The cabin went still, not silent. Aircraft cabins are never truly silent. There was the soft hiss of air from the vents, the dull thump of luggage being shoved into overhead bins, the metallic click of seat belts. But something human went quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when people sense unfairness, but are not yet brave enough to name it. Thomas Reed sat by the window with one hand resting on the back of his service dog, Ranger. He was 58, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, with the worn calm of a man who had seen worse rooms than this one. He wore a dark jacket, clean jeans, and polished brown boots. Nothing flashy. Nothing that announced money or rank. That was part of why Linda had judged him so quickly. Ranger lay folded neatly at Thomas's feet. The dog did not bark, did not lift his head, did not crowd the aisle. His breathing was slow and steady, like a metronome, trying to teach the cabin how to behave. Linda did not care. She leaned into the aisle from seat 3C, her pearl bracelet catching the overhead light as she jabbed one finger toward the floor. "I paid for first class," she said. "I did not pay to sit next to a dog." A few passengers looked down. A man in row 2 pretended to adjust his cufflinks while watching from the corner of his eye. A woman across the aisle tightened her grip on her phone, debating whether to record. No one spoke. Emily Carter, the flight attendant, stopped beside row 3, with a practiced smile that was already beginning to crack. "Mom, is there a concern?" Linda gave a short laugh. Not the kind that carried humor, the kind that carried entitlement. "A concern? Yes. There is an animal in the cabin. Right there, at his feet, and nobody told me." Emily glanced at Ranger, then at Thomas. For one brief second, her eyes softened. She knew what a trained service animal looked like. She had seen pets in vests before. Nervous animals, restless animals, animals whose owners kept pulling treats from pockets to control them. Ranger was not that. He was still, focused, almost invisible. Emily opened her mouth, ready to explain policy. Then she looked at Linda again. The expensive coat, the sharp tone, the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. The decision formed on Emily's face before she said a word. "Sir," she said, turning toward Thomas instead of Linda, "we may need to discuss your seating arrangement." Thomas looked up slowly. He did not look surprised. That made the moment heavier. He had the expression of a man who had been here before, maybe not in this cabin, maybe not on this airline, but in enough places where people looked at him and saw inconvenience before humanity. "My seating arrangement," he repeated. His voice was low, controlled, no anger, no fear. Emily swallowed. "Yes, sir. If the animal is making another passenger uncomfortable, we may need to find a better solution." Linda sat back with a satisfied breath, as if justice had already arrived and taken her side. Thomas looked down at Ranger. The dog shifted only once, pressing closer to his leg. A small movement, loyal, protective, quiet. Across the aisle, an older man lowered his newspaper. His eyes moved from Thomas to Emily, then to Linda. He understood the shape of the situation. Many people did. But understanding is not the same as courage. Thomas gently rubbed Ranger's shoulder. "This dog is not bothering anyone," he said. Linda tightened. "He is bothering me." There it was. Not safety, not space, not policy. Me. Emily's smile faded another inch. "Sir, do you have documentation for the animal?" Thomas reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Calmly, carefully. He moved the way men move when they know sudden gestures can be misread. He removed a folded packet and placed it on his lap. "I do," he said. Linda gave a small scoff. "Anyone can print paperwork." A few heads turned now. The words had gone too far. Even Emily felt it. Her cheeks warmed, but she did not correct Linda. Thomas did not answer the insult. He had learned long ago that some people wanted anger from him. They wanted volume. They wanted proof that their fear had been reasonable. So he gave them none of it. Only stillness, only dignity, only the quiet weight of a man who knew exactly who he was, even when others did not. Near the front galley, the cabin phone rang once. Emily glanced toward it. The boarding door was still open. The flight was already close to schedule. One delay could ripple through the entire afternoon. Linda crossed her arms. "Well," she said. Thomas lifted his eyes to Emily. "Before you make this bigger than it needs to be," he said, "I would suggest you check the passenger record carefully." Emily frowned.
The passenger record?
Thomas gave the smallest nod. Yes, his hand remained on Ranger's back, and for the first time, the calm in his voice did not sound passive. It sounded like warning. Emily Carter held Thomas Reed's gaze for 1 second too long. There was something in his voice that made her pause. Not fear, not arrogance, not the defensive tone she was used to hearing when passengers knew they were wrong and wanted to argue anyway. This was different. This was the voice of someone who knew the rules better than she did. Still, Linda Harper was watching her. So were the passengers. And Emily could feel the old pressure of the job pressing against her ribs. Keep the cabin calm. Keep premium passengers happy. Keep the flight on time. Do not let one complaint become a report. She looked down at the folded packet on Thomas's lap. "Sir, I can review the documents," she said. Thomas handed them over without a word. His fingers were steady. Emily noticed that. She also noticed the scar along the back of his right hand, pale and jagged, disappearing beneath his sleeve. She wondered where it came from, then pushed the thought away. Her job was not to wonder. Her job was to move the flight. Linda leaned toward the aisle. Finally, she muttered. Ranger remained at Thomas's feet, his head low, his body tucked so tightly beneath the seat that even a rolling bag could pass without touching him. His ears moved once when Linda spoke, then settled again. Emily opened the packet. There was a letter from a licensed physician, a veterinary vaccination record, training certification from a service dog organization in Virginia. Everything looked complete. More than complete. The papers were organized in plastic sleeves, dated, signed, and clear. Emily felt heat rise in her neck. This should have ended the matter. But Linda was not looking for facts. She was looking for victory. "Well?" Linda asked. Emily took a breath. "Mom, the documentation appears to be in order." Linda's mouth opened slightly, then hardened. "Appears?" Emily chose her next words carefully. "The animal is trained, controlled, and permitted to travel with the passenger." Linda gave a sharp little laugh. "Permitted by who?" "Because I was not asked. I have allergies. I have anxiety around dogs. I have rights, too." A man in row 2 shifted uncomfortably. The woman across the aisle finally lifted her phone higher. Not quite recording yet, but close. People were beginning to understand that this was no longer about comfort. It was about power. Thomas looked straight ahead. He could feel the stares. He had felt them in airport lounges, restaurants, hospital waiting rooms, and once, years ago, at a memorial service, where a stranger asked if he was part of the cleaning staff. The body remembers things the mind tries to forgive. His thumb moved slowly over Ranger's fur. The dog felt the change in him. Not fear, not panic, just the tightening, the old storm behind the ribs. Ranger pressed his shoulder against Thomas's boot. That small pressure brought Thomas back to the present. Emily lowered her voice. "Mom, if you have a medical concern, I can check whether another seat is available." Linda blinked. "For me?" Emily hesitated. "Yes, Mom. If you would be more comfortable, we can look at options." Linda's face changed. It was subtle, but everyone close enough saw it. The surprise, the insult, the disbelief that the solution might involve her moving instead of him. "I am not moving," she said. "I selected this seat. I paid for this seat. He is the one who brought a dog into first class." The words landed hard. Thomas turned his head then, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to meet her eyes. His face was calm, but his eyes were not empty. They carried a fatigue older than this flight. "His name is Ranger," Thomas said. Linda stared at him. "Excuse me? His name is Ranger," Thomas repeated. "He is not a problem. He is not luggage. He is not a disruption. He is working." For the first time, a few passengers looked ashamed. Emily's hand tightened around the papers. She knew he was right. She knew it in the way Ranger had not moved. She knew it in the way Thomas had kept his voice level, while being treated like an inconvenience in a seat he had every right to occupy. But before she could respond, footsteps came from the front of the cabin. Mark Bennett, the lead flight attendant, walked to row 3 with his tablet in one hand and a fixed professional expression on his face. He had been with the airline for nearly 20 years. He knew how to enter a tense space. Shoulders square, voice low, no sudden movement. Emily turned toward him with relief and dread. "Mark," she said quietly, "we have a passenger concern regarding a service animal." Linda straightened at once. "Not a concern," she said. "A serious failure in passenger comfort." Mark stopped beside the row and looked down at Ranger. The dog looked back once, then rested his chin on Thomas's shoe. Mark's eyes flicked to Thomas. "Sir, I'm Mark Bennett, lead attendant for this flight. I understand there is an issue we need to resolve." Thomas took the documents back from Emily and placed them neatly on his lap. "There is no issue with me," he said. Linda scoffed. "Unbelievable." Mark glanced at her, then back at Thomas. "Sir, no one is accusing you of anything. But when another passenger raises a concern, we are required to review the situation." Thomas nodded once, then review it properly. The words were quiet, but they cut clean. Mark's expression tightened, not with anger, with recognition. He had heard that kind of sentence from attorneys, federal inspectors, and corporate compliance people. People who did not threaten, people who documented. He looked at his tablet and typed Thomas's name, Thomas Reed, then he froze. Only for half a second, but Thomas saw it. So did Emily. Mark's thumb hovered above the screen. His eyes moved over the passenger notes, then back to Thomas. Something in his face lost its certainty. Linda did not notice. She was too busy waiting to be validated. Mark swallowed. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice a little lower now, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Thomas did not move. "No," he said. "Anything about my right to sit here can be said right here." Mark Bennett did not answer right away. That was the first thing the cabin noticed. He had arrived with authority in his shoulders. The kind of authority that usually made people lower their voices and accept whatever came next. But now he stood in the aisle with his tablet in his hand, looking at Thomas Reed as if the floor had shifted under him. Emily saw it too. Her stomach tightened. "Mark," she said softly, "is everything okay?" Mark blinked, then cleared his throat. "Yes, everything is fine." But his voice had changed. Linda Harper leaned forward, irritated by the pause. "Then handle it," she said. "I do not understand why this is taking so long. He has a dog in first class, and I am uncomfortable. That should be enough." A few passengers reacted this time. Not loudly, just little signs. A lifted eyebrow, a slow turn of the head, a quiet breath through the nose. Linda heard none of it. People like her often mistook silence for support. Thomas heard all of it. He kept his hand on Ranger. Mark looked back down at the tablet. There was a special note attached to Thomas Reed's passenger profile. It was not long, but it was the kind of note crew members were trained not to ignore. Verified guest. Federal liaison contact on file. Do not separate passenger from service animal without compliance review. Mark felt his mouth go dry. He tapped the screen once, hoping he had misread it. He had not. Thomas watched him with that same controlled stillness. "You found the note," Thomas said. Mark's eyes lifted. The words were not loud, but they seemed to pass through the cabin like a cold draft. Linda frowned. "What note?" Mark did not answer her. "Miss Reed," he said carefully, "I apologize if this has been handled in a way that felt confrontational." "Felt?" Thomas repeated. The words sat there. Emily looked down. Mark took a breath. "Was confrontational," he corrected. "I apologize if this was handled in a confrontational way." Linda's face flushed. "Excuse me, why are you apologizing to him?" "Because," Mark said, turning slightly toward her, "his service animal is permitted. His documentation is complete. And at this time, there is no evidence that he has violated any airline policy." Linda's lips parted in disbelief. At this time, her voice sharpened. "I am telling you there is a violation. I have a right to a safe and comfortable flight." Thomas turned toward her again, slower this time. "Mrs. Harper," he said. She stiffened at the sound of her name. "You know my name?" "It is on the seat display," Thomas said, "and on the boarding list the crew keeps glancing at." Her cheeks colored, he continued, voice even. "You do have rights. So do I. Rights are not a ladder where yours sit above mine because you speak louder." The cabins went still again. This time the silence was different. It was not fear. It was attention. Linda looked around, as if expecting someone to come to her defense. The man in row 2 suddenly found great interest in his folded napkin. The woman across the aisle finally pressed record, her thumb trembling slightly, not out of excitement, but out of the feeling that something important needed to be preserved. Emily shifted her weight. "Mom, we can check for another seat if you feel uncomfortable." Linda snapped her head toward her. "I already said I am not moving." "Then what exactly are you asking for?" Thomas asked. Linda glared at him. "I am asking for basic standards." Thomas nodded once, as though he had expected that answer. "Basic standards," he said softly. Then his eyes dropped to Ranger. For a moment his voice slowed. The sharp edge faded, and something more human came through. "This dog has woken me from nightmares when I could not breathe. He has pulled me away from panic in grocery stores, at intersections, and in parking lots when a car backfired, and my mind thought I was somewhere else. He has stood between me and the kind of darkness people like to thank veterans for surviving, but rarely want to sit beside. No one moved. Even the engine hum seemed softer." Thomas looked back at Linda. "So, when you call him a disruption, understand what you are really saying. You are saying the thing that helps me live should disappear because it makes you uncomfortable." Linda looked away first. It lasted only a second, but everyone saw it. Mark's face had gone pale. Emily's eyes were wet, though she blinked fast and forced them clear. She had a brother who came back from Afghanistan quieter than he left. She had never known what to say to him. Listening to Thomas, she suddenly understood that while politeness was not the same as compassion. From the front of the aircraft, the cabin phone rang again. Mark picked it up from the wall near row 1. His back was turned, but the cabin could hear pieces. "Yes, Captain. Yes, I'm with the passenger now. Documentation is valid. No, he has not been disruptive." A pause. Mark's shoulders tightened. "Understood." He hung up. Linda's eyes narrowed. "What did the captain say?" Mark turned back slowly. "The captain has been informed of the delay," he said. "Ground operations has also been notified." Linda sat back, satisfied again. "Good." Mark looked at Thomas. "Mr. Reed, Captain Collins would like to avoid any additional delay. He has asked whether you would be willing to relocate to a comparable seat further back in the cabin. With Ranger, as a courtesy." The word courtesy hit harder than a command. Thomas's face did not change, but Ranger lifted his head. Emily felt the mistake before anyone spoke. Thomas looked at Mark. "A courtesy to whom?" Mark hesitated. The cabin waited. Thomas leaned back, his voice calm, but colder now. "Be careful before you answer." Mark Bennett did not answer fast enough. That was his second mistake. Linda Harper seized the silence like it belonged to her. "A courtesy to the entire cabin," she said sharply. "Some of us would like to take off without this unnecessary drama." Thomas turned his eyes toward her, not with anger, but with something worse for her. Clarity. "This drama began when you pointed at my service dog and demanded that one of us leave," he said. Linda's jaw tightened. "I asked a reasonable question." "No," Thomas said. "You made a judgment, then you dressed it up as a concern." The words were calm, but they landed with force. A woman in row 4 covered her mouth. The man with the newspaper stopped pretending to read. Emily Carter stood frozen, with the service documents pressed against her chest, wishing she had ended this when she had the chance. Mark cleared his throat. Mr. Reed, no one is asking you to leave the aircraft. Thomas looked back at him. Not yet. Mark flinched. The cabin phone rang again near the front galley. This time, nobody moved to answer it right away. The sound cut through the air once, twice, 3 times. Each ring made the cabin feel smaller. Finally, Emily stepped forward and picked it up. Yes, Captain. She listened, her face losing color. Yes, sir, I understand. She hung up slowly. Mark watched her. Emily, what did he say? Emily hesitated. Captain Collins is coming out. A ripple moved through the cabin. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the subtle shift of bodies reacting to authority. Shoulders straightened. Phones rose a little higher. Linda smoothed the front of her jacket, as if preparing to be vindicated by a judge. Thomas remained seated. Ranger settled his chin back on Thomas's boot. A few seconds later, the cockpit door opened. Captain David Collins stepped into the aisle. He was 50, 2 silver at the sides with the measured walk of a man used to being obeyed in confined spaces. His uniform was crisp, his expression was controlled. But behind his eyes was irritation, not at anyone in particular yet, at the delay, at the uncertainty, at the fact that a quiet boarding issue had reached his cockpit before pushback. He stopped near row 3. What seems to be the problem here? Linda answered before anyone else could. Captain, thank goodness. I am being forced to sit next to a dog in first class, and your crew refuses to protect my comfort. Captain Collins looked at Ranger, then at Thomas, then at Mark. Is this a service animal? Yes, Captain, Mark said. Documentation appears complete. Appears complete? Linda repeated. Captain Collins lifted one hand slightly, asking for silence without saying it. Mr. Reed, he said, using the name from Mark's tablet. I understand you have a service dog with you. Thomas nodded. That is correct. And you are unwilling to relocate to another seat if one is available? Thomas looked at him steadily. I am unwilling to be moved because another passenger does not like the presence of my medical accommodation. The phrase medical accommodation changed the air. Captain Collins knew the weight of those words. Every airline employee did. They were not casual words. They belonged to training modules, legal briefings, complaint investigations, federal guidance, and the kind of paperwork that could follow a crew for years. His tone shifted a fraction. No one wants to deny you an accommodation, sir. Then do not ask me to move from it. Linda let out a frustrated breath. This is ridiculous. He is making himself the victim. Thomas did not look at her. Captain Collins did. Mom, please let me handle this. That sentence surprised her. It was the first time someone had not treated her comfort as the center of the room. Her face tightened. Captain Collins turned back to Thomas. Mr. Reed, I need this aircraft ready for departure. I also need all passengers calm before we close the door. If this situation continues, it may create a disruption. Thomas leaned forward slightly. Captain, with respect, a passenger can create a disruption by making a discriminatory complaint. The person being complained about does not become the disruption simply by existing. The silence that followed was heavy. Linda seemed to feel it. Emily lowered her eyes. The words hit something in her. How many times had she chosen the easiest passenger to pressure, instead of the fairest solution? How often had peace in the cabin meant asking the quiet person to swallow the insult? Captain Collins looked at Thomas for a long moment. Who are you, Mr. Reed? Thomas's expression did not change. A ticketed passenger in seat 3A. That is not what I mean. Thomas's hand stilled on Ranger's back. For the first time, something guarded passed over his face. I know what you mean, he said. And that is the problem. Captain Collins inhaled slowly. From Linda's side, a small voice came from row 4. He has not done anything wrong. Everyone turned. The speaker was an older woman, with white hair and a blue cardigan. Her hands trembled slightly around her phone. She looked embarrassed by her own courage, but she kept going. That dog has been quieter than most passengers. This man has been polite the whole time. Linda snapped toward her. Nobody asked you. The woman's chin lifted. Maybe someone should have. That was the moment the cabin changed. Not completely. But enough. A man behind her nodded. Another passenger whispered, "She is right." Someone near the aisle began recording openly now. No hiding, no pretending. Captain Collins saw it all. The phones, the faces, the wrong direction of the room. Then his radio crackled at his belt. "Ground operations to Flight 331. We have passenger relations, requesting status on Mr. Thomas Reed. Please confirm no separation from service animal pending review." Captain Collins froze. Mark closed his eyes for half a second. Emily looked at Thomas. Linda blinked. "Passenger relations," she said. Thomas finally reached into his jacket and removed a slim black card. He placed it on the armrest not to impress anyone, but to end the guessing. On the card were his name, a direct federal advisory title, and the logo of a National Veterans Access Board that worked with major airlines on disability compliance. Captain Collins stared at it. Thomas's voice stayed quiet. "I was on this flight to evaluate your service animal procedures after 3 complaints from disabled veterans this quarter." No one breathed. Then Thomas looked at Linda, then the crew, and so far, he said, "The system is failing." Captain Collins looked at the black card as if it had changed weight in the air. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The cabin still hummed around them. Air flowed from the vents. A baby cried somewhere near the rear, then quieted. A suitcase wheel clicked as a late boarding passenger froze near the galley, unsure whether to move forward or step back. But row 3 did not move. Linda Harper stared at Thomas Reed's card. Her confidence did not disappear all at once. It cracked in small places first, around the mouth, around the eyes, in the way her fingers tightened over the armrest. "You are evaluating this flight?" she asked. Thomas picked up the card and placed it back inside his jacket. "I am evaluating the airline's response," he said. "Not you, personally." Linda let out a stiff laugh. "Well, it feels personal." Thomas looked at Ranger. "It became personal when you asked that my medical support be removed from my side." The words struck the cabin harder than Linda expected. Not because Thomas raised his voice. He did not. But because he had stripped the argument down to its truth. No polish. No disguise. No polite language covering an ugly demand. Captain Collins shifted his stance. "Mr. Reed, I need to contact ground operations and passenger relations immediately." Thomas nodded. That would be wise. Mark Bennett stepped back, his tablet gripped tight in his hand. He had trained younger attendants for years. He had told them to de-escalate, to listen, to avoid assumptions. Yet here he was, standing in the aisle, realizing he had almost asked a disabled veteran to move, because the louder passenger had made discomfort sound like authority. Emily Carter felt it too. She stepped closer to Thomas, her voice quiet. "Mr. Reed, I should have handled this differently from the beginning." Thomas turned to her. "Yes," he said. The answer was not cruel. It was worse. It was honest. Emily swallowed. "I'm sorry." Thomas studied her face for a moment. She meant it. He could see that. But he had learned not to confuse apology with repair. "Thank you," he said. "Now make sure it does not happen to the next person." Emily's eyes lowered, then lifted again. "I will." Linda shifted sharply in her seat. "Are we really doing this right now?" "We are still sitting at the gate. I have a connection in Denver. This is becoming absurd." The older woman in the blue cardigan turned toward her. "Mom, with respect, you caused the delay." Linda's head snapped around. "I did not." "Yes, you did," the woman said, her voice shaking but clear. "You complained about a service dog that was lying quietly at his feet. Then you kept pushing after the crew confirmed the documents." Linda's face flushed deep red. "You do not know anything about my allergies." The woman looked at Ranger. "Have you sneezed once?" A few passengers murmured. Someone gave a short breath that almost became a laugh, then stopped. The tension was too sharp for humor. Captain Collins raised his hand. "Enough, everyone please remain seated." Then he looked at Thomas. "Mr. Reed, I am going to step forward and speak with operations. Until then, you and Ranger will remain in seat 3A." Linda turned. "What?" Captain Collins did not look at her first. He kept his eyes on Thomas, as if correcting the order of importance in the room. You will not be separated from your service animal, he said, and you will not be asked to move unless you request it. Thomas gave a single nod. Thank you, Captain. Only then did Collins turn to Linda, Mrs. Harper. If you have a documented medical issue, we can try to reseat you. If you do not wish to move, then you are choosing to remain in this seat while the service animal stays where he is legally permitted to be. Linda stared at him. So I am the one being punished? No, Captain Collins said. You are being given a choice. That sentence changed everything. Linda had wanted power. Instead, she had been handed responsibility. She looked down the aisle. Phones were still raised. Faces were watching, not all accusing, some simply disappointed, and that was harder. For the first time, her voice dropped. I just wanted a comfortable flight. Thomas looked at her then, and something in his expression softened. Not enough to excuse her, enough to remind everyone he was still human, and so was she. So did I, he said. The words landed gently, but they carried years. Linda looked away. Captain Collins stepped toward the galley and picked up the cabin phone. His voice was low, but certain phrases carried back. Confirmed service animal. Passenger remains seated. Need compliance review noted. Yes. Veteran Access Board representative. Yes, I understand. Mark stood beside Emily, silent. She whispered, Did you know? No, Mark said. Would it have changed what we did? He looked at Thomas, at Ranger, at Linda's stiff posture. It should not have needed to. Emily said nothing after that. At the front of the cabin, the gate agent appeared at the aircraft door with a woman in a navy blazer. Rachel Moore from Ground Operations. 48, composed, sharp-eyed, carrying a folder and a radio clipped to her belt. She did not rush. People who knew how to take control rarely needed to. She walked straight to row 3. Mr. Reed, she said, I'm Rachel Moore, Ground Operations Supervisor. I understand there has been a service animal complaint. Thomas looked up. There has been more than a complaint. Rachel's eyes moved across the cabin. Linda, Emily, Mark, the captain at the phone, the passengers recording. Then Ranger, still lying exactly where he had been all along. Her expression hardened. Yes, she said, I can see that. Rachel Moore did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She stood beside row 3 with her folder tucked under one arm, looking at each person in turn. First Thomas, then Ranger, then Linda Harper, then Emily and Mark, who suddenly looked less like senior crew members and more like people waiting for a verdict. Rachel had worked airport operations for 22 years. She had seen passengers scream over missed connections, broken seats, lost luggage, and crying babies. She had seen real safety issues and fake ones. She had learned to hear the difference between a concern and a demand, wearing a concern's coat. This sounded like the second one. Mr. Reed, she said, may I confirm that Ranger has remained under your control the entire time? Thomas nodded. Yes. Has he barked, lunged, blocked the aisle, or interfered with boarding? No. Rachel looked at Emily. Is that accurate? Emily's mouth tightened. Yes. Ranger has been quiet the entire time. Rachel turned to Mark. And the documentation? Complete, Mark said. Physician letter, vaccination record, training certification, and passenger profile note. Rachel's eyes sharpened. Passenger profile note? Mark glanced at Thomas, then back at Rachel. Federal liaison contact on file. Compliance review required before any separation from the service animal. Rachel slowly closed her folder. Then why was relocation being discussed? Nobody answered. The silence was not empty. It was full of guilt. Captain Collins returned from the galley phone, his face controlled but tight. Ms. Moore, operations wants this resolved quickly. Rachel did not look away from Mark. Then let us resolve it correctly. Linda sat forward. Excuse me. I would like it noted that I am also a paying passenger. I have been made uncomfortable from the moment I sat down. Rachel turned toward her with professional calm. Mrs. Harper, I understand you feel uncomfortable. Feel? Linda repeated. I am uncomfortable. Rachel nodded. Then we can offer you another first-class seat if one is available. If not, we can explore other options at the gate, including rebooking. Linda stared at her. Rebooking me? Rachel's voice stayed even. You are the passenger, objecting to a legally permitted service animal that has not caused a disruption. Mr. Reed is seated in his assigned seat with a documented accommodation. We cannot remove his accommodation because another passenger dislikes it. The words were clean, precise, final. The woman in the blue cardigan looked down, almost relieved. The man with the newspaper slowly folded it, no longer hiding. He wanted to remember this exact moment. Maybe because he had stayed silent too long in other moments like it. Linda's face hardened again, but the power behind it had thinned. So that is your answer? I either sit here next to that dog or I leave? Thomas's hand stopped moving on Ranger's back. Rachel looked at Ranger, then back at Linda. His name is Ranger. Linda blinked. What? Rachel's tone did not change. His name is Ranger. And yes, your choices are to remain in your assigned seat, except reseating if available, or deplane voluntarily and speak with customer service. What is not an option is forcing Reed to give up a lawful accommodation. For the first time, Linda looked around and saw the room clearly. Not the room she had imagined. Not a room full of people waiting for someone to protect them from inconvenience. A room full of witnesses. Some with phones, some with guilty faces. Some simply tired of seeing dignity treated like something negotiable. She swallowed. I did not mean to make it sound like that. Thomas looked at her. But you did make it sound like that. His voice was quiet, not cruel, but it left no escape. Linda's eyes flicked to Ranger. He is very quiet, she said, as if discovering something that had been true the entire time. Thomas nodded. He usually is. A slow, painful pause opened between them. Linda looked at her hands. My brother had a dog, she said suddenly. The words came out smaller than expected, almost unwilling. The cabin did not relax, but it listened. After Vietnam, she continued, he could not sleep. Not really. He had this German shepherd that followed him everywhere. I thought it was strange back then. I was young. People did not talk about these things. Thomas studied her. What happened to your brother? Linda breathed in. It shook slightly. He died before he turned 60. The sentence changed her face. For one moment, the entitlement fell away, and something wounded showed through. Old grief, old ignorance, maybe regret. Thomas did not soften completely. He did not owe her that, but his eyes changed. I am sorry, he said. Linda nodded once quickly, as if accepting kindness embarrassed her. I suppose, she whispered. I forgot what those dogs can mean. Rachel watched the exchange with careful stillness. She knew better than to rush forgiveness into a room that had not earned it. Healing was not a shortcut. It was a door. Someone had to choose to walk through. Captain Collins checked his watch, then looked toward the front. We still have time to make our departure window if we close the door soon. Rachel looked at Linda. Mrs. Harper? Linda's mouth trembled slightly. Pride fought shame. Shame almost lost. Then she looked at Thomas. I will stay in my seat, she said, and I will not make another complaint. Thomas nodded. That is enough for now. Emily exhaled for what felt like the first time in several minutes. Rachel turned to the crew. Then this matter is closed, as far as boarding is concerned. Ranger remains with Mr. Reed. No further discussion. Document the interaction after departure. Passenger relations will follow up. Mark nodded. Understood. Rachel stepped closer to Thomas. Mr. Reed, I am sorry this happened on our aircraft. Thomas looked up at her. I appreciate that, but I want your report to say something clearly. Rachel opened her folder. What is that? Thomas's voice lowered. The problem was never the dog. Rachel held his gaze. Then what was it? Thomas looked around the cabin at every face that had watched, waited, judged, or learned. The problem was who people believed deserved comfort first. The cabin door closed with a firm, metallic click. It was a small sound, but everyone felt it. The argument had ended on paper. Ranger stayed. Thomas stayed. Linda stayed. The aircraft was cleared to push back, but inside first class, the air still carried the shape of what had happened. Some things do not disappear, just because people stop talking. Emily moved down the aisle for final checks, but her hands were not as steady as before. She touched seatbacks, checked belts, glanced at tray tables, and tried to look professional. Yet each time she passed row 3, she felt the weight of Thomas's words. The problem was who people believed deserved comfort first. She had heard complaints all her career. Too cold, too warm, too slow, too crowded, too loud. But she had never thought about how often the quiet passenger was asked to bend so the louder one could feel powerful. At row 3, she stopped. "Seatbelt secure, Mr. Reed?" Thomas looked up. Yes. Ranger lay beneath him, still tucked neatly, his vest visible now in the soft cabin light. "Working dog. Do not distract." Emily nodded, then looked at the dog. "And Ranger is okay?" Thomas studied her for a moment. The question was simple, but it mattered because she had used his name. "He is okay." Emily gave a small nod and moved on. It was not forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a better step than silence. Across the aisle, Linda Harper sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap. She was not looking at Thomas. She was looking at the seat back in front of her as if it held instructions for how to become invisible. She could feel people glancing at her. That was new. Linda was used to being the person who complained, not the person being judged for complaining. She had spent years believing that good service meant removing whatever made her uncomfortable. A crying child, a slow waiter, a passenger who reclined too far, a dog beneath a veteran's seat. But now her brother's face would not leave her mind. Eddie Harper. 19 when he left for Vietnam. 40 when she finally understood. He had come home with something no one could see. He used to sit in the garage with his shepherd, Duke, one hand buried in the dog's fur, staring at nothing. Linda had been embarrassed back then, when Duke followed him into restaurants or sat beside him at family gatherings. She had called it strange. She had called it dramatic. Now, decades later, in a first-class cabin at the gate, she had used almost the same cruelty on a stranger. The realization made her throat tighten. Captain Collins's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We have resolved the boarding matter and expect to depart shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while we push back from the gate." Resolved. Thomas heard the word and looked out the window. The jet bridge moved away. Ground crew in neon vests signaled below. Rain streaked lightly across the glass, turning runway lights into blurred lines of gold and red. Resolved was a clean word, too clean. Nothing about humiliation felt resolved while the body was still carrying it. Ranger lifted his head and nudged Thomas's knee. Thomas breathed in slowly, then out. He counted the way he had been taught. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. The cabin faded slightly, not gone, just softer. Ranger stayed with him, warm and real, anchoring him to the aircraft instead of the memory. Thomas placed 2 fingers behind the dog's ear. "I'm here," he whispered. Ranger blinked. Linda heard him. She turned just a little, not enough to intrude. Enough to see the quiet ritual between man and dog. There was no performance in it, no attempt to win sympathy. Just need, just trust, just survival made ordinary. Her face changed again. This time, nobody saw it but Thomas. He did not say anything. The aircraft began to roll backward. A low rumble moved through the floor. The overhead bins creaked. Somewhere behind them, a child asked if they were flying yet, and an older man chuckled softly. Normal life trying to return. But Rachel Moore had not left the aircraft yet. She stood near the front with Mark Bennett, speaking in a low voice while the cabin crew prepared for taxi. "I want the incident report written before wheels up," she said. Mark blinked. "Before wheels up?" "Before memory edits itself," Rachel said. "Names, times, exact language used. Who suggested relocation, who confirmed documentation. Everything." Mark swallowed, understood. Rachel's eyes moved to Emily, who was securing a cabinet latch with more force than necessary. "And I want the crew debriefed after landing." Captain Collins stepped closer. "Miss Moore, we have departure timing to consider." Rachel looked at him. "Captain, departure timing matters. So does federal compliance. So does whether disabled veterans trust this airline enough to board, without wondering if their medical support will be treated like a nuisance." The captain did not respond at once. He was a good pilot, careful, experienced, proud. But pride had gotten him close to a wrong decision, and he knew it. "You're right," he said finally. Rachel nodded. "Then be right in the report, too." She stepped toward the aircraft door just before it was armed, then paused and looked back at Thomas. "Mr. Reed." Thomas turned. "Thank you for staying calm." His face remained steady. "Do not thank me for surviving what should not have happened." Rachel absorbed that. Then she nodded once. "Fair enough." The door was armed. The plane taxied, and in seat 3C, Linda Harper slowly turned toward Thomas. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice small enough that only he could hear. Thomas looked at her. Linda's fingers trembled against her pearl bracelet. "I cannot undo what I said." "No," Thomas said. She's nodded, hurt by the truth, but not denying it. "But I am sorry." Thomas looked down at Ranger, then back at her. "Sorry is where repair begins," he said, "not where it ends." Linda lowered her eyes. For once, she had no argument. The aircraft climbed through a layer of gray clouds, and the cabin tilted gently into the sky. For most passengers, takeoff brought relief. The long wait was over. The engines settled into their deep, steady roar. The seatbelt sign glowed above them. The flight had finally become what everyone expected it to be, a trip from one city to another. But for Thomas Reed, the hardest part was not the delay. It was the return to normal. That was the part people misunderstood. A person could be humiliated in public, then expected to sip water, accept peanuts, and behave as if nothing had happened. The world moved on quickly when the wound was not on its own skin. Thomas looked out the window as the ground disappeared beneath the wing. Streets became lines. Cars became dots. The airport became a small square of concrete behind them. Ranger stayed pressed against his boot. Linda Harper sat across the aisle with both hands, folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She had apologized. She meant it. But apology had left her sitting with herself, and that was not easy. Regret is quiet, but it is not gentle. Emily Carter began service once the aircraft leveled off. Her movements were careful now, not performative. Careful in the way people become when they realize their job is not just procedure, but impact. She approached row 3 with a bottle of water and a small napkin. "Mr. Reed," she said, "would you like some water?" Thomas looked up. "Yes, thank you." Emily placed the bottle on his tray table, then paused. "And may I bring a bowl of water for Ranger once it is safe?" Thomas studied her. "That would be appreciated." Emily nodded, then glanced at Linda. "Mrs. Harper, may I get you anything?" Linda opened her mouth, ready to ask for her usual sparkling water with lime. Then she stopped. Her eyes moved to Thomas, then to Ranger. "Just water, please," she said. "Regular water is fine." It was a small thing. Nobody else would have noticed. But Linda felt it. For the first time that morning, she did not want to sound important. Emily moved on. In row 4, the older woman in the blue cardigan leaned across the aisle just slightly. "Mr. Reed," she said. Thomas turned. "I am Ruth Miller. My husband served in Korea. He passed 12 years ago." Thomas nodded, his face softening. "I am sorry for your loss." Ruth smiled sadly. "Thank you. He never talked much about what happened over there. But our old beagle Sam knew more than any of us did. When my husband had a bad night, Sam would climb right into his lap, even though he was too big for it." A faint smile touched Thomas's mouth. "Dogs do not care what we pretend to be." Ruth's eyes shone. "No, they do not." Linda heard every word. Her throat tightened again. The cabin around them had shifted from spectacle to reflection. Not everyone changed. Some passengers went back to their tablets. Some whispered about the delay. One man complained under his breath about missing a meeting. But others sat differently now. They carried the discomfort of people who had watched something wrong and were deciding what kind of witness they wanted to become. Near the galley, Mark Bennett typed the incident report on his tablet. Rachel Moore's instruction echoed in his mind. Before memory edits itself. So he wrote it plainly. Passenger in seat 3C objected to service animal. Crew requested documentation, though animal was calm and controlled. Relocation of passenger in seat 3A was discussed to satisfy another passenger's comfort concern. He stopped there. His thumb hovered over the screen. The sentence looked ugly because the truth was ugly. He added one more line. Crew should have offered relocation only to the objecting passenger after validating the service animal accommodation. He stared at it, then saved the report. Captain Collins remained in the cockpit, but he was not untouched by it either. Through the closed door, he replayed the conversation again and again. His own words bothered him now. I need all passengers calm. It had sounded reasonable when he said it, but calm for whom? Too often, command meant quieting the person with the least power. Too often, order meant protecting the comfort of the person who complained first. He had not intended to do harm. That was the problem. Harm did not always need intention. Sometimes it only needed speed, pressure, and an old habit of believing the wrong voice. Back in row 3, Linda finally turned toward Thomas, Mr. Reed. He looked at her. My brother's dog was named Duke, she said. I never liked him much then. He shed everywhere. Followed Eddie into every room. I thought it was too much. Thomas has listened without interrupting. After Eddie died, she continued. I found a box in his closet. Letters, medical forms, notes from doctors. I think Duke was the reason he made it as long as he did. Her voice broke on the last words. Thomas looked down at Ranger. Then maybe Duke did his job well. Linda pressed a hand to her mouth. Yes, she whispered. I think he did. For a while, there was only the sound of the engines. Then Thomas said something no one expected. You saw a dog and thought inconvenience. I saw a dog and thought survival. That difference matters. Linda nodded slowly. I know that now. Thomas looked at her with steady eyes. Knowing has to become behavior. Linda did not defend herself. I understand. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime. Emily returned with a small paper bowl of water. She crouched just enough to set it within Thomas's reach, careful not to touch Ranger or distract him. For Ranger, she said. Thomas took it. Thank you, Emily. Hearing her name from him made her pause. It felt like a chance. Not a clean slate. A chance. She straightened, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she looked at Thomas without fear of being judged. I will do better, she said. Thomas gave a faint nod. That is all any of us can prove. Outside the window, the clouds opened. Sunlight filled the cabin, and for one brief moment, nobody spoke. The seatbelt sign chimed again halfway through the flight. A thin ribbon of turbulence passed under the aircraft. Just enough to make glasses tremble and shoulders tense. The cabin lights dimmed a little. Outside, the sky had turned a hard blue above the clouds. Beautiful in the way only distance can be beautiful. Thomas Reed felt Ranger shift beneath him. Not fear, alertness. The dog lifted his head and looked up, ears slightly forward. Thomas followed his gaze and saw Linda Harper gripping the armrests across the aisle. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing had become shallow. She was trying to hide it. That made Thomas notice more. Linda had spent the first part of the flight, demanding comfort from everyone else. Now discomfort had found her quietly, without permission. Her face had gone pale. One hand moved toward her chest, then away as if she did not want anyone to see. Thomas leaned slightly toward the aisle. Mrs. Harper. She opened her eyes. I am fine. The words came too fast. Thomas did not argue. Do you need help? No, just turbulence. But the aircraft had already steadied. Emily Carter was a few rows ahead, collecting cups. Thomas looked toward her. Emily. Kit. She turned at once. Something in his tone made her move quickly. Can you check on Mrs. Harper? Linda shook her head. I said I am fine. Emily crouched beside her seat, careful and calm. Mrs. Harper, are you feeling dizzy? Short of breath? Chest pain? Linda looked embarrassed now, almost angry with her own body. I just need a minute. Ranger stood, not fully into the aisle, not in a way that blocked anyone. He rose only enough to place his front paws steady, and his head angled toward Linda. His training was visible in every inch of him. Controlled, focused, waiting. Linda stared at him. He knows, Thomas said quietly. Knows what? When someone is in distress. Linda swallowed. I am not in distress. Then her breath caught, just once, but it was enough. Emily stood quickly and pressed the call button near the galley. Mark Bennett came down the aisle, followed by a man from row 5, who had already unbuckled his seatbelt. I am a retired paramedic, the man said. Name is George Alden. May I? Emily looked to Linda. Mrs. Harper? Linda nodded, fear finally breaking through pride. George knelt in the aisle. He was in his late 60s, with steady hands and the quiet face of a man who had walked into emergencies for most of his life. Mom, look at me. Slow breath in. Good. Again. Linda tried, her eyes filled. I'm sorry, Sheriff, he whispered. I do not know why this is happening. George checked her pulse at her wrist. Could be anxiety. Could be blood pressure. Could be a lot of things. We are going to take it seriously. Captain Collins's voice came through the intercom a moment later. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a passenger needing medical attention. Please remain seated unless requested by the crew. The cabin changed again. No whispers now, no judgment, no phones lifted high. People watched with concern, but softer this time. The same first-class cabin that had treated Thomas's needs like a debate was now witnessing another truth. Vulnerability does not ask whether you deserve it before it arrives. Ranger remained near Thomas's leg, eyes fixed on Linda. Linda looked at him, tears slipping down before she could stop them. He is watching me. Thomas nodded. That is part of his work. After what I said to him, Thomas looked at Ranger, then back to her. He does not hold grudges. People could learn from that. The sentence was gentle, but it did not excuse. It invited. Emily brought oxygen from the forward kit. Mark retrieved the medical bag. George asked simple questions. Medication, history, recent stress. Linda answered between breaths, each answer so smaller than the last. I skipped breakfast. I had coffee. My brother's birthday would have been today. That last sentence made Thomas look up. Linda closed her eyes. I did not realize that was why I was so angry. Nobody spoke for a moment. There it was, not an excuse, a root. Grief had entered the cabin wearing arrogance. It had pointed at a dog and called him a problem. It had mistaken old pain for present danger, and it had hurt someone who had already carried enough. Thomas knew that kind of confusion. He had lived it. After a few minutes, Linda's breathing slowed. George stayed beside her until her color returned. Emily handed her a cup of water with both hands. You are going to be okay, Mrs. Harper. Linda nodded weakly. Thank you. Then she turned to Thomas, not to the crew, not to the witnesses. To him, Mr. Reed. Thomas met her eyes. I was afraid before I was cruel, she said. But that does not make the cruelty right. Thomas held her gaze. No, it does not. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I am sorry to you. And I am sorry to Ranger. Ranger sat back down beside Thomas's boot, as if the matter were simple. Linda gave a broken little smile. He accepts? Thomas looked at the dog. Ranger accepts calm behavior. Linda nodded. Then I will try to offer that. The aircraft continued west, steady now. In the galley, Emily stood beside Mark, watching row 3. I thought this job was about managing passengers, she said quietly. Mark looked tired. So did I. Emily folded the used napkin in her hand. Maybe it is about seeing them first. Mark did not answer, but his face said the lesson had landed. Thomas leaned back as Ranger settled again beneath the seat. The cabin had not become perfect. People had not become saints in an hour, but something had shifted. A woman who had demanded removal had needed care. A dog like such she had rejected had noticed her distress. A man she had insulted had asked for help on her behalf. That was not weakness. That was dignity. And dignity, once shown clearly, can make a small room feel larger than it is. By the time Flight 331 began its descent, the cabin felt nothing like it had at the gate. The same seats were there, the same overhead bins, the same narrow aisle, the same soft lights above polished armrests and half-empty cups, but the people inside had changed in small, visible ways. Emily Carter walked through first class with slower steps now. She checked on passengers, but her attention carried more care. When she reached Thomas Reed, she did not lean over him like a person managing a problem. She stopped beside him like a person approaching another person. "Mr. Reed, we will be landing soon," she said. "Is there anything Ranger needs before we begin our final descent?" Thomas looked up from the window. "No, thank you for asking." Emily nodded. She wanted to say more. She wanted to fix the first 20 minutes of the flight with one perfect sentence. But life does not work that way. So she chose something smaller and more honest. "I wrote my statement," she said. "I included that Ranger never caused a disruption." Thomas studied her face. "And that I turned to you first when Mrs. Harper complained," she added. "That was wrong." Thomas gave a faint nod. "That matters." Emily swallowed. "I hope it does." "It will," he said, "if you let it change how you work." Across the aisle, Linda Harper sat quietly with a cup of water in both hands. Her breathing had steadied. Her color had returned. But her pride had not fully recovered, and that was probably a good thing. Pride sometimes needs to break before compassion can get through. She looked down at Ranger. The dog lay calmly against Thomas's boot, unaware of status, wealth, cabin class, or public embarrassment. He only knew the work. Watch, listen, steady the person who needed him. Linda turned to Thomas. "Mr. Reed," she said softly. He looked at her. "When we land, I am going to contact my nephew. He served in Iraq. We have not talked much in years. I think I stopped asking questions because I was afraid of the answers." Thomas did not rush to comfort her. "Then start with listening," he said. Linda nodded, eyes wet again. "I can do that." Ruth Miller, the older woman in the blue cardigan, reached across the aisle and touched Linda's forearm. It was brief, gentle, no speech, no performance. Just one human hand reminding another that shame does not have to be the final place a person lives. The aircraft broke through the clouds. Below, the city appeared in gray and silver blocks, roads curving like dark ribbons. The landing gear lowered with a heavy mechanical groan. Some passengers tightened their seatbelts. Others looked out the windows. Everyone felt that familiar pull downward, the body knowing Earth was near before the wheels touched it. Captain Collins came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach. We appreciate your patience today. We also want to thank you for your cooperation while we addressed a passenger accommodation matter earlier in the flight. Our airline is committed to treating every traveler with dignity, and we will be reviewing today's incident carefully." He paused. His next words came slower. "Some lessons matter more than an on-time departure." In row 3, Mark Bennett closed his eyes for a moment. Emily looked toward Thomas. Linda looked down at her hands. Thomas looked at Ranger. The wheels hit the runway with a firm burst of sound. Rubber met pavement. Engines roared in reverse. Bodies leaned forward, then settled back. The cabin filled with the ordinary noises of arrival, phones turning on, seatbelts clicking too soon, bags shifting in bins. But nobody in row 3 moved quickly. When the plane reached the gate, Rachel Moore was waiting inside the jet bridge. She stepped on board before general deplaning began, folder in hand, face steady. "Mr. Reed," she said, "Passenger Relations and Corporate Compliance have requested your full report. They will meet you in the terminal if you are willing." Thomas stood slowly. Ranger rose with him, close at his side. "I am willing," he said. Then he looked at Emily, Mark, Captain Collins, Linda, Ruth, and the passengers who had watched the day unfold. "But my report will not be about punishment first. It will be about prevention, training, accountability, clear procedures, and remembering that disability does not always look the way people expect it to look." Rachel nodded. "That is exactly the report we need." Linda stepped into the aisle, holding back tears. "Mr. Reed," he turned. "Thank you for helping me when I did not deserve it." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "People do not have to deserve help before we give it," he said. "But they should remember who helped them when they had the chance to harm." Linda pressed a hand to her chest. "I will remember." Thomas gave a small nod, then walked toward the door with Ranger at his side. No applause followed him. That would have made it too easy, too clean, too much like a movie. Instead, there was something better. Silence with weight. Respect with understanding. A cabin full of people thinking about what they had seen and what they might do differently next time. As Thomas stepped into the jet bridge, Ranger looked up at him. Thomas smiled for the first time that day. "Good boy," he whispered, and the dog moved forward, steady as ever, carrying with him a truth every person on that flight had been forced to learn. Comfort is not the same as dignity. Policy is not the same as justice. And respect should never depend on whether someone has the power to hold you accountable. If this story reminded you to look twice before judging someone, hit like, subscribe for more stories about justice and human dignity, and comment, never stay silent.